welcome everybody to today's webinar on the topic of HLA communication strategies, troubleshooting the issues, and improving the process. My name is Heidi Aguiar, and I'm part of the Alliance team, and we welcome you to today's webinar. I actually was lucky in that I got to see the slides, and you're in for a treat. I'm going to go through the next slides real quick so that we don't waste any more time. Just as a reminder, you are in listening only mode. So if you have questions for the speaker, you need to submit those through the chat icon on the bottom left-hand corner. Just type in your questions. We will hold them till the end, but at that point, our moderator, Carrie, will pose those questions for you to the speaker. Also, just to let you know that registration is open for our next webinar. Actually, during the month of July, we're not going to have any webinars. I know a lot of people are on vacation, so in July we're not going to have any webinars, but our next webinar will be in early August on the topic of what happens in the OR, shouldn't stay in the OR, sharing best practices before, during, and after an organ recovery. This will be also a fun webinar, kind of talk show style, so don't miss that one. For today's webinar, we are offering 1 CEPC credit and also 1.2 nursing contact hours, and that's courtesy of Iowa Donor Network. So for those of you who are listening in a group, whoever registered for this webinar will be receiving the evaluation email. Please make sure you take note of everybody who's in your group so that you can forward that evaluation email to them so that every single person who's listening in can claim their contact hours, whether it's CEPC, nursing, a certificate of attendance, or a combination. Now, just to note, for nursing, you only have 14 calendar days, so please make sure to complete that evaluation process within that time frame, and for CEPC credits, you have 30 days. So if you did not receive the evaluation email in that time frame, please make sure to contact the person who led your group or to contact the Alliance so that we can send you the evaluation link. At this point, I'd like to introduce our moderator for today. Our moderator is Carrie McCrossan. She is a member of our transplant webinar faculty, and she was the one who identified Dr. Alquist to present today and identified this topic and coordinated all the details. So thank you, Carrie. Carrie is a listing kidney transplant coordinator at Ochsner Multi-Organ Transplant Institute in Louisiana, and I'm going to turn it to Carrie to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Heidi. Dr. Alquist is a graduate of both the Louisiana State University Health Sciences Center MD PhD program and their anatomic and clinical pathway residency. She returned to New Orleans following the completion of her transfusion medical fellowship training at Dartmouth-Hitchcock Medical Center to join Ochsner's section of transfusion medicine and histocompatibility. With more than a dozen publications and extensive presentation history, Dr. Alquist has a strong professional interest in interdepartmental collaborations and scholarly work. She is currently training along Dr. Shannon Cooper to become the medical director of Ochsner's Histocompatibility and Immunogenics Laboratory.
Right. Thanks for having me, everyone. The name of my presentation, of course, is HLA Communication Strategies, Troubleshooting the Issues and Improving the Process. I want to thank Carrie for inviting me to speak, and I'm happy to answer any questions after this presentation as well, but hopefully I can address them throughout the talk. Heidi, did you need to jump in?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So the learning objectives today are threefold. First, to describe the importance of a close working relationship between a robust transplant service and their histocompatibility lab. 2, to identify potential weak points in the listing transplant process in terms of the transplant team to HLA lab communications. And 3, to describe strategies and practices to overcome transplant team to HLA lab communication challenges. So I would consider our lab to be medium-sized here. We have about 14 dedicated employees that are performing hospital services related to disease association typing and blood donor testing, but we also provide service for 5 very active transplant services, including heart, lung, kidney, liver, and bone marrow. I would say on average per year we're performing about 700 allo physical cross matches yearly, but that number is quickly increasing. For a little background, I wanted to let everyone know that we are not located in the same location as the medical center proper. So the transplant centers are all going to be located here at the Ochsner Medical Center, and we are about 3 miles away at one of the facilities that Ochsner owns, known as Elmwood. So that's about 3 miles and anywhere from a 10 to 15-minute drive. So the overarching theme of this presentation really is just to describe how important a close working relationship is between an HLA lab and its transplant team. And it's really essential to get everyone at the same level so that you can address whatever issues are arising and really troubleshoot things as they occur. For us, the most important thing we've found is that we need to bring all the stakeholders to the table on a regular basis. And we've identified those at this facility to be our transfusion medicine physicians, our HLA physicians, our HLA supervisors and team, our laboratory information systems IT team, our electronic medical record IT team, our transplant coordinators and staff, including procurement, and of course our transplant physicians. This, of course, is a huge group of people, and they don't always have to be on the same phone calls at the same time. It's just important that everyone knows who they can reach out to with an issue and do so in a timely fashion. The areas that we really discuss routinely, of course, are going to be the listing process, the waitlist period, the peri-transplant time, as well as the monitoring period after the completion of the transplant. So here's a little graph to show that a little bit better. So we've divided it into these 4 time periods, and I've listed here kind of the troubleshooting areas of concern that our lab has addressed in collaboration with our transplant centers. And obviously these are not in a perfect temporal relationship. We didn't start with unacceptable antigen listing confusion and end with EMR limitations. These have all been occurring, some simultaneously, some at different times. But I felt presenting them in this fashion was the most organized way to get through it all. So where we're going to start is the listing process, and we're going to cover our first 2 weak points, or troubleshooting areas that we have addressed and we believe found solutions for. So the first issue is going to be really unacceptable antigen listing confusion. So what we found is what we see on our laboratory information system side is a beautiful graphical representation of how antibodies are behaving, which easily can be graphed over time to show how things are waxing and waning, appearing or disappearing over the patient's time course. Unfortunately, as things filter through our information system into our electronic medical record system, they're not always displayed in such a user-friendly fashion, and that's not always something we can control. So I have an example here of a pattern we may see on the left, but what we see on the right is what is available to our procurement and transplant coordinators on the other end of the line. As you can see here, our class 2 antibodies are described in strings followed by ellipses, and over these different time periods, it's hard to tell what's appearing or disappearing or changing. And sometimes it's even hard to figure out what you should include in the listing itself. We are often reporting HLA antibody results in many different fashions, different modalities, and then typing, which also needs to be included on that listing form, is often presented in low-res fashion as well as intermediate. So as we got together to discuss the difficulties with this, we got everyone on board, and especially our IT team, and we've developed a way to kind of really address these issues. So what we do is that for our listings, all new listings are going to be reviewed monthly by our HLA team in collaboration with the transplant physicians. And we're going to make sure that the correct typing and unacceptable antigens were listed in UNOS at that time. And we're also going to be doing monitoring of all unacceptable antigens at every result point for every patient for our larger programs. So we don't do this across every program, but certain organ transplant groups have decided that it is helpful for us at result time to confirm that the UNOS listings reflect the patient's most current sample. For our smaller programs who want to really have a more individualized approach to how they're listing antibodies, they are going to be receiving from our HLA physicians regular patient notes upon request. And these allow us to regularly review the allo-immunized patient profiles and to really offer their options for listing to optimize offers. And then this way the HLA physicians, which are also the transfusion medicine physicians at this facility, can then enter discussions regarding desensitization protocols. Another issue that we had during the listing process was surrounding listing form delays. So what we inherited before anyone can really remember was this paper form that needed to be entirely filled out by all parties prior to a patient's listing in UNOS. To get this done in a timely manner, it was faxed between groups, everyone filling out their part and cross-checking for transcription errors. But unfortunately, what we had deemed to be a very efficient process often resulted in complete scribbles by the time it was time to actually put that data in UNOS, which really circumvented the whole attempted efficiency with this process. So as we all got together to talk about ways to improve this process, we got IT on board, and they helped to develop an automated listing form. All the data that we were manually inputting on this piece of paper can now be accessible from our electronic medical record. And if we kind of lean into our EMR that we have available, we can make it work for us. So we haven't quite gone live with this, but it is in the near future that it will be turned on, and eventually will be available for all organ transplant teams. We hope that this is really going to eliminate a lot of transcription problems. It's going to speed things up, and it's going to reduce a lot of redundant workflow. So here I have an example of kidney waitlisting note, which is our first group to pilot this new automated listing form. And you can see here that the organ pulled in automatically, the patient information, in this case our test patient, Jane Doe, and the coordinator who's going through this information then is able to answer, with the assistance of smart fields or smart text areas, any information that can't be directly pulled in by the form. And later the procurement individual can double check any listing details before the final listing period. The idea is that listing this in this fashion will reduce redundant work, and of course when things are done it can be routed to the HLA lab, who is then notified that the patient requires sample boxes and sample tubes to get their blood sample in as soon as possible. All right, on to the waitlist period. So in the waitlist period, I think everyone's pretty familiar with what the HLA lab needs, and what y'all need is we need samples. We need samples on your patients on a regular basis so we can best provide them with the best chance at an organ. So of course sample request and sample receipt are going to be the main focuses of this period for us. So one of our issues that we found when we started discussing ways that we could improve our services were that patient letters were not always being sent to the correct addresses. So our HLA lab does provide, we do send out patient letters for sample requests for our larger program, which is kidney, on a monthly basis. And we believe that our electronic medical record system, which is regularly reviewed by coordinators and updated, was performing an auto update to our laboratory information system module, from which those letters were generated on a monthly basis using third-party software. Once we realized that some letters were not occurring or not being routed to the correct addresses, we kind of developed this quick workaround, at least it was our stopgap method, which was if the dialysis center addresses were not updating on a regular basis, we would then use phone calls between coordinators and my HLA staff to amend the dialysis center information, which we could then use for letters generated from that software. But as you can see, this workaround really doesn't eliminate any work, and it's really not using our electronic medical record system to its fullest potential. So what we decided to do is that if our electronic medical record was our source of truth, why were we even letting this information filter through two other servers, essentially? What was decided then was we needed to develop a way to generate letters directly from our source of truth, which is the electronic medical record system, and eliminate the whole issue of any lost data as that information is filtered or auto-pushed into our laboratory information system. So our solution was that all we had to do was generate letters from our EMR, which sounds simple in concept. However, it required a lot of work behind the scenes between our LIS and EMR departments to really make this a reality. But with a lot of work, we were able to develop this beautiful waitlist screen So here you can see a nice list that is going to sort patients by organ over here. I don't know if you guys can see my arrows. So patients are sorted by organ and their dialysis center with their correct dialysis center addresses, as well as the coordinator if HLA Lab has any questions. And we can actually bulk print these now. So this new system makes sure we have the most accurate data that allows for easy bulk printing, eliminating the need for that third-party software, which we can then send to our mailroom, which automatically folds and mails out these letters. So by doing this, we were actually able to really streamline a lot of our workflows and prevent unnecessary work. So just so you can see, these are the kind of the letters that are generated. The patient name and medical record number will be auto-populated into this area, and the correct dialysis center will be located at the top. And as these letters are tri-folded, they will flip right into an envelope with a nice easy view window and go to the correct location. Right. So now that we figured out really the sample request issues, the problem was we still saw sample receipt problems. The problems we were identifying with sample receipt were accessioning delays. There would be missing and broken tubes, which the patient and coordinator were unaware of. We saw decreased compliance from our monthly samples, and some patients were expressing concerns regarding postage fees and methods of delivery, and some of our dialysis centers were also having the same vocal concerns. So we had to all get together to kind of discuss how to address this. And one of the important things to remember was that HLA is off-site, so we are getting samples from a lot of different locations. So if a sample is sent to our main campus, specimen receiving, it arrives by courier 3 times daily. If it is an urgent main campus specimen, we have actually made sure that we have a dedicated taxi service that will get it to us quickly, and they have the ability to drop it off in an after-hours box, which is the safest way to deliver it to our techs in the middle of the night. But if samples were coming from patient homes or dialysis centers, they were actually using the postal service, and we found that often this was an area where things were getting lost. But thanks to our close working relationship and open communication lines, we were able to identify that this really was the point of contention, and we were able to discuss our issues with the postmaster, who was able to actually identify our problems were related to routing issues and just required some minimal labeling changes to ensure proper handling, which rapidly increased our ability to receive samples in a timely, non-broken fashion. We also got together with our EPIC team and made sure that as samples are received at their final destination at HLA, they are now documented in EPIC, which is viewable by the coordinators. And we now have a way to designate unacceptable samples in our electronic medical record, which can notify patients and coordinators and physicians that even though a sample was received, it was either labeled inappropriately or may have arrived broken or unacceptable for another reason, which we have found has improved compliance. We, of course, also, now that we had our up-to-date addresses, when you correct your request, your receipt obviously improves as well, but we also started paying for postage for these as well. Once we made all these changes to the routing process, paid postage, and fixed our addresses, we saw a steady increase in sample compliance and improved patient and dialysis center satisfaction. Another very important piece is that on the transplant side, they now have a listed multidisciplinary clinic in which patients receive education at semi-annual visits, sometimes 6 months, sometimes every 12, where they're educated on many things related to their potential listing or transplant. But an important piece for us is they're now educated on the importance of samples and why their antibodies are important as well, which we believe has also had a pretty rigorous effect on our sample compliance. So moving on to the peri-transplant area, for us, our one area of concern was cross-match related. No surprise there. I think everyone's pretty aware of how cross-matching has changed over time, but what we were seeing was that we were doing large numbers of prospective cross-matches, which everyone knows incur a lot of time delays and can limit your out-of-state offer acceptances. And all of our teams were really interested in a way to improve their option. And of course, if we could improve their options and save money at the same time, that would really be ideal. So we really just all got together to really discuss that we really need to start optimizing and implementing the virtual cross-match program, which would, instead of shuttling everything to prospective cross-matches, some patients with stable antibodies really would benefit from the virtual cross-match experience, which would then be followed by a retrospective cross-match after transplant. So optimizing the virtual cross-match program really first started with physician education, really showing how if we could use virtual cross-match more readily, we could increase our out-of-state donor options, improve waitlist times, and show that this time saved in waiting for the cross-match results could translate directly into more flexible surgical schedules. And of course, we could benefit on the back end in that less on-call time would be required from my HLA techs in the middle of the night. Instead of doing physical cross-matches, they could perform a virtual cross-match in a much shorter time period. And it was important to educate everyone that this is really, it's an antigen avoidance strategy using a virtual cross-match. The idea is a virtual cross-match just compares donors' HLA antigen profiles with the recipient's antibody profile. And so when a virtual cross-match is ordered, we are reviewing all records, all potential recipients' records of antibodies for the past year. So we're not just looking at the last sample, we're looking at all records within the past year to make sure that they don't have an antibody that would cause the potential organ they would receive to be rejected. And so here's a slide that we presented on kind of one of those physician education pieces showing, you know, if we start here and we have an allo-immunized patient on the wait list and we identify a donor heart, this is just using heart as an example, and then we require a prospective cross-match which could take up to 6 hours from the call for prospective cross-match to result, we're now really coming up and limiting our 6-hour cold ischemia time constraint for our heart transplant team, and that could result in a missed opportunity, leaving that patient on the wait list. However, if when the donor heart is identified, we're able to progress down the virtual cross-match pathway, we could perform that within 20 minutes. We could accept that offer if the virtual cross-match was negative, and the patient could receive that organ in a more timely fashion. The nice thing, too, is if we're able to accept that offer more quickly, it really helps the other transplant teams in that the placement time is reduced, which is going to allow other procurement offers to proceed more quickly. So if the heart and lung are placed quickly, kidney is going to hear in a more timely fashion that the organ's available as they have worked down that list. All right. So we also saw that as we started using virtual cross-match on a more common basis, we needed a way to document that in the medical record. Our stopgap, of course, was to just put the results of the virtual cross-match in the next day, but we needed a better answer. So what we've done is we have designed an electronic medical record orderable test, which can then be released in the middle of the night from our laboratory information software with the result. So physicians and surgeons will now have real-time documentation of the results of their virtual cross-matches, be they positive or negative, in the patient's record in real time. In addition, anytime you change your process, you got to make sure everyone's on board. So changing this cross-match utilization strategy required a lot of coordinator workflow changes. And in those training sessions, they really stressed the need for retrospective cross-matches after the patient receives the organ following a virtual cross-match. And they made some workflow changes, of course, to ensure the timely completion of this testing. We recognized that once we went to virtual cross-matches, a lot of people thought that the whole concern with HLA was over, but we really got together to really talk about the need and importance of doing that retrospective following the transplant. All right, so now in the monitoring period, we really want to talk about kind of electronic medical record limitations. I think every group has some concerns and complaints about their current electronic medical record system. But it's important to know that if you get on the same page as your IT team, you can often find a lot of solutions to the issues you're encountering. So as I mentioned earlier, the things we see are not the same as the things that you see often, which is why that communication piece is so important. Unfortunately, current limitations of the software that we're using, so the ability of our HLA laboratory information system module to speak to the electronic medical record system, really limits our ability for display currently. There is hope for the future. You have to remember that this is a slide you have seen before. There are ways to optimize the way that we communicate our results, seeing as it is different. I think that listing reviews on a regular basis are very important. That regular monitoring of those results from the HLA side being translated directly to the UNOS website is an important feature. And I also think that patient notes by your HLA physicians are extremely helpful in kind of coaching teams in how to interpret the results, which often are not as straightforward as one would hope. It's also important to remember that electronic medical records are constantly developing and improving. And for example, the system that we use here, there is actually an HLA module on the horizon, which will better display what we see to the coordinators and clinicians on the other side. So the hope is that as our EMR system grows, that we will be adopting this module, which will really help display things in a more user-friendly fashion. So hopefully throughout this presentation, I've kind of hit some of the spots where we saw room for improvement. We really looked at that unacceptable antigen listing confusion and tried to clarify it through unacceptable antigen review, as well as the development of electronic medical record notes. We looked at our listing form delays and really found a way to streamline it via listing form automation. We looked at our sample request problems and solved them through electronic medical record generated letters. We saw our sample receipt problems and addressed them through postage paid mailers to new up-to-date addresses, some specimen receiving changes, and patient education. We also looked at some of the cross-match confusion in the peri-transplant time, and we're hoping to improve those through the use of virtual cross-match, the resulting of virtual cross-match in our electronic medical records, and to coordinate cross-match changes with our teams as clearly as possible. And the forever there EMR limitation piece. We're really hoping that as our electronic medical record system grows, that we can really lean into it and use it to our advantage and look forward to the future applications they have on the horizon. And of course, any communication piece, I can't pretend that everything's done. We have a lot of future projects on the horizon. I hope that we will always have projects on the horizon because there's always room for growth and improvement. Some of our low-hanging fruit, the things that we're really looking to do soon, is kind of some more one-on-one HLA teaching with our surgeons to make that cross-match interpretation in the middle of the night a little bit easier and more understandable. We're trying to find ways to really streamline our verbiage as well as their understanding of the science as we are trying to translate it. So we're hoping to use things like easy-to-read charts and quick 5-minute kind of tutorials to clarify that. We're also looking at streamlining our testing. So we're seeing some areas where we can kind of tighten up our testing modalities, and we're hoping that these changes will kind of free up some tech time to get our turnaround times a little bit better and really improve the patient experience in getting the results quicker and giving us time to more thoroughly work up patients who require that extra time in a more timely manner. So hopefully throughout this I've kind of covered those learning objectives. I mean, I think we've shown why a close working relationship is important between a transplant service and their HLA lab. We've also identified some weak points in the listing process, well, really the listing process all the way through the monitoring process. And we're hoping that some of the strategies and practices that we've shown you today will help you overcome some of these communication challenges with your own labs. And of course, I really want to thank our transfusion medicine service team. We are very lucky here in that our transfusion medicine service team is actually includes the HLA physicians. So we do have 1 foot in the hospital and 1 foot in the HLA lab. We do split our time between both locations, which I think is very helpful for communication. We have an amazing HLA team. We have 14 dedicated employees and an amazing lead tech supervisor staff. Special thank yous to Crystal Brewer and Bina Aurora. And we couldn't do all that we've done without our IS support. For us, we do use the SOFT laboratory information system, and we have that coupled with Epic and Phoenix on the EMR side. And then, of course, we really do appreciate all the work from the Multi-Organ Transplant Institute. So special thanks to Kathy Bailey and Carrie McCrossin. The transplant coordinators and staff have been so wonderful since I started here. And once again, the approachability and accessibility of the transplant physicians has really been a key component of making these changes and getting things through quickly. And so at this time, I kind of wanted to turn it over to our coordinators, and if they have anything they wanted to add. They've been with me as we've made a lot of these changes, and they were making a lot of these changes before I got here.
This is Kathy Bailey. I think the key thing is the communication. And as a coordinator, we often get the phone calls from the dialysis unit or the patient saying, I sent my blood, why don't you have my blood, those kind of things. So with our program, we use SERA to do and we have previously were doing prospective cross matches off of SERA available. So if the SERA wasn't available, we weren't able to do the cross match, or it would delay it by bringing the patient in. So that was one of our goals, was to increase the communication with the HLA team so that we could ensure that that sample was there and that the patient, we could process the patient through the transplant as quickly as possible, hopefully decrease the ischemic time, and ensure that we had what we needed to perform a safe transplant. So I would encourage everybody to communicate with your HLA team, because everybody has a different kind of view of how things are going, and until you kind of bring things to light, processes can't really be worked out. And I think we've worked really hard and done a lot of meeting and talking through things of how things work well in the lab versus how things work on the clinical side. So that's probably the only thing I have to add to that. And again, it is still a process that we're working through. We're definitely not perfect at it, but I think we've increased our available samples probably by 30% or more from what we were previously had, just by looking at the process. So that benefits the patient. All right. Anybody else want to say anything? I'm sorry, I sound like a frog.
So I suppose we sped through that a little faster than anticipated, but I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have. We do have kind of a unique situation here with our LIS and EMR combos, but I'm happy to help anyone with any similar troubleshooting issues.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alquist, for a very thorough presentation, and I think very practical presentation. There was a lot of great guidance and details on the approach that you took to rectify some of the areas of challenge for you all. So this is the time where we can entertain questions from those of you who are listening in. Your lines are muted, so in order to pose questions for Dr. Alquist, just click on that icon on the bottom left-hand corner, the chat icon, and type in your question, and we will be able to receive it on this end. So while we're doing the Q&A time, we will have this poll up. So those of you who are listening in a group, if you can please go ahead and complete the poll, how many people are in your group. And I will turn it to Carrie to start navigating the questions.
Okay. Okay, we have one question. Do you change for your virtual cross matches? I don't think
that's
charge.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So interestingly, there's currently not a charge code that we can use for virtual cross matches, but what we needed to do was really find a way to give credit to our technical staff in the middle of the night, pulling up all these results, and really just have a way to account for the time taken in the virtual cross-match period, which is one of the driving forces behind the orderable virtual cross-match option. So by having an orderable virtual cross-match option, you can result in real time, which is obviously a huge benefit to the patient, but you can also account for that test in your, essentially, in your end of the year or your monthly testing volumes. So we kind of felt that developing that test code was mutually beneficial. So if charging ever does become available, we have a test that we can easily drop in the appropriate charge.
I actually have a question.
Okay.
What is the difference in the accuracy of when you're using a virtual cross match, and then you're going to go from a prospective or a retrospective? What is the accuracy compared?
Okay. So I think what we've seen is greater than 95% correlation between our virtual cross-match predictions with what we see on retrospective. Would you agree with that? Dr. Cooper's here, my mentor, that's kind of leading me through the lab, he sounded.
Yes, I think it's probably even higher than that. It depends a little bit on the patient. If their antibody profile is stable and has been for a while, and I think the virtual cross-match probably approaches 100%. For some patients that have a changing pattern, there's a risk of having a positive cross-match the next morning, but that risk is very, very small. I think probably only 1% or 2%, and we would just have to deal with it. And I think the surgeons and the transplant physicians understand that there is a slight risk.
So what have you done for the patients that have been on the list for a longer period of time with all the new technology that you have regarding the more specificity of the HLA antibodies?
Okay. So one of the things that we've done is we've started to look at patients that have been on the list for several years, and we're actually working backwards to see if there's anything we can adjust in their unacceptable antigen listings and maybe optimize their chances if we were to switch to a virtual cross-match, so we could increase their offer geography, essentially. And we found that by kind of tweaking, going backwards, that we are seeing some increased transplants that might have missed out on that, some of the optimization overhauls we've done for the newer or younger listed patients.
That's interesting.
Oh, I think there's some we didn't know how to flag them. So when resulting, here's another question for us. When resulting cross matches, do you put the results in the donor or the recipient chart? So we are putting cross match results in the recipient chart because often our donors are not even registered. So we're still in the process of figuring out how to essentially give an EPIC identification to our deceased donors. But we find that those results are most important to be in the recipient's chart so that the surgeon can see them prior to transplant.
Do you have different cutoff risks for HLA AB DR versus HLA CW DQ DP low expression?
So that's a very program-specific question, and we're constantly discussing our cutoffs in every joint agreement. Programmatically, Dr. Cooper, would you like to speak to how things have changed over time?
Well, I always tell the HLA techs that determining the unacceptable antigens is a negotiable event. Sometimes we look at them and everybody knows that the C locus is less likely to cause a positive cross-match at the same level that an A locus antibody would be. So we just individualize it, basically.
And what about living donors?
So living donor cross matches, those results would also go into the recipient's chart, but the donor name would not be listed.
And those are all done. We do a prospective process.
Yeah, and those are all done on a prospective basis. Please let me know if I answered that to what you were looking for.
All right. Carrie, did you have any further questions prepared for Dr. Alquist?
No, I think that we have answered all. She's answered all the questions that we have over here.
Okay, great. Well, it looks like we've come to the end of the questions from the participants. So for those of you who listened in today, thank you very much. Actually, there is, one more question that just came in.
Where do you put results so the surgeons can see them prior to surgery?
So on that slide I showed with the EPIC orderable test, the thought is that these patients would have these standing orders that can be released with the virtual cross-match results. Those results will appear under the Results tab. So if you have EPIC, it would show up under Results tab as results of virtual cross-match. The systems do interface between our laboratory information system and our EMR.
And they are working on an interface between the coordinators and the HLA techs, because at present time we actually do not see the same we see the same information, but it's not on the same spreadsheet as far as the EMR records. So when Dr. Alquist had them side by side, you could definitely see the difference between the red and the green and the yellow on the chart versus just the straight up and down, or the just going across. It's a lot easier on your eyes to see it in the color form.
And the HLA system that we use here is soft HLA. All right, I think we've answered them all.
Yeah. At this point, I think we've addressed all the questions, unless something pops in here in the next minute or so. For those of you who participated today, thank you very much for your time, and to Dr. Alquist and Kathy and Carrie and Dr. was it Cooper in the background there chiming in. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you, Dr. Alquist, for a thorough presentation and for providing some very practical information. So with that, I'm going to close out the webinar and wish everybody a wonderful day. And for the speakers, I'll move us back into the speaker room. Have a great day, everybody. Take care. And, wonderful 4th of July as well. Bye.